When we went to launch this maternal and child health program, we did a lot of interviews, a lot of community meetings where we actually called the whole community together to say, this is what we're thinking about doing, what do you think? And we did big feedback forums and just, community town hall meetings to solicit feedback. And at one point, a village chief pulled us aside and said, I've been the chief of this village for 50 years, and this is the first time anyone has ever asked for my opinion before they came and did something.
Next step is just to do listening. And so what we're going to do is plan out how to listen, what we want to ask, who we want to ask it to, and how we're going to ask it.
I like to say that at this point you should listen, 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 and then listen some more. I think there's two ways to approach this at this point. So you might have an idea of what some of the weaknesses of your idea. You can establish a list. And you can, you're sort of testing your hypothesis. Another way, and you can do both of these, is to present the idea as it has been designed and then solicit feedback. So simply say, what's missing? What's not going to work? What are your questions? And what we've found is that people are very excited, especially in places where they're very rarely asked for their opinion. They're very excited to share that input and to give those insights. So in our case, we identified women. Obviously, their mothers are the ones who bring their kids when they're sick. Fathers, because we don't like to leave out the dads. Who are the leaders in communities? Village chiefs. Also, in a lot of communities where we work, there are women's groups. So we interviewed women's group leaders, providers, nurses and midwives in clinics, government officials, and then also traditional healers. Acknowledging that they're a very big provider of healthcare in the community, it was important to get their insights. Establish your list, come up with all the people you think, and then think about who you left out. Because oftentimes that person that you left out is going to have the most interesting insights. I like to combine different forums for feedback. So community meetings are a great way. Everyone's hearing the same message at the same time. So it's really good for transparency and communicating consistent messaging. In West Africa, in northern Togo, when they want to have a community meeting, somebody walks around with a big gong, a big drum, the night before and sort of announces that there's going to be a community meeting the next morning. And then the next morning, everybody comes out, sits around the chief's house, and the chief introduces the topic of the meeting. And so when we wanted to launch a new maternal and child health program, we went to the community, called the whole community together and said, hi, we want to introduce ourselves. This is who we are. This is what we've done in the past. And this is what we want to do. What do you think? And at that point, we just sat back and listened. And we got some really, really interesting insights at that point. But some people might not be so comfortable saying something in front of a large group. And so that's why it's really important to also create space for one-on-one feedback sessions. It's great for discussing more sensitive issues that might not be as easy to discuss in large groups. Also, people can share insights and perspectives that may be controversial. And one-on-ones are great for sort of fact-checking and validating. Sometimes you could say, I've heard this. Does that jive with your opinion or your experience? We've had a really funny thing happen, or privately women will tell us, I can't use family planning because my husband won't let me. And then in a community meeting, we'll share that feedback and discuss it, and husbands will say, she never asked me. And so we have learned and have those conversations with husbands, with wives. We engage men and women differently when it comes to topics like family planning. There are also other methods for soliciting feedback and input. So surveys, paper surveys, or surveys on apps or tablets, even feedback forms that you can leave behind, or sort of, what do they call them, suggestion boxes. So there are a lot of different ways. I think if you're at the early stages of designing something, being out there in the community is really, really important. But all of those communication mechanisms help to create the full picture, help to really, really give you the full picture of what's happening. So this step can take a lot of different forms. It can range from the very structured formal research where you do qualitative interviews, key informant interviews, to the very, very informal, walk around, find somebody, sit down on a bench and chat them up. And so, it's up to you to decide where on that spectrum you'd like to land. If you're launching a big program, I would highly advise doing a formal baseline study and getting that qualitative data as early as possible so you can incorporate it into your design. Let's say you're developing a new app and you're doing really, really early stage user testing. Maybe it's just a couple users testing and providing oral feedback. So I think you can customize that based on the stage of the process and also the resources that you have at your disposal. So it might not always be appropriate to have everyone in every conversation. For example, in work with HIV patients, we've found that, and this is not rocket science, having an HIV patient speak with another HIV patient changes the dynamics of the conversation. We use that same philosophy in our mentorship approach. So a nurse mentors or coaches another nurse, and that peer dynamic, that commonality and sense of equality helps to make for a more productive mentorship relationship. I think if you're doing formal research, definitely hire a qualified interviewer. Qualitative interviewing is a skill, and find somebody who can do that very well. Where are the places in a community where people gather? Maybe it's religious institutions, so the mosque on Friday is a great place. Churches on a Sunday. Are there women's groups? When do they meet? If you're working with a homeless population, maybe there's a feeding program that they go to. There are always structures existing in a community that you can plug into and leverage to have access to that community. So if you're not from this community, you don't know how to convene a community meeting, which is why it's so important that you have somebody on your team who is from that community or is from communities like that community who know those mechanisms and know those channels and know who to work through. So in our case, it happens to be that you approach the village chief and you say, this is a message that I'd like to communicate to the community. Would you be willing to call a meeting? You decide on the date for the meeting, make sure there's no big weddings or funerals or festivals or holidays happening that day. And then the chief really takes the lead. What's cool about that process is the chief now has taken ownership over a step in implementing your program. So you've now made him your colleague, your partner in the implementation of this program, because he's using his strengths and his power to convene a meeting to help deliver the message that you want to get across. So you've not only empowered him by reaching out to him and soliciting his input before going to the community, but you've made him part of the team and you've made him feel ownership over this by using that channel to get the information out. And all the more, all the better you are showing respect for those existing community structures and adapting your system, program, service, or idea to fit in with what the community is already doing. Sometimes the people who ask the most questions or seem the most skeptical at the outset, you take the time to answer their questions, to address their concerns, they then become your champions. And so they're the ones who will advocate for your approach within the community. We have village chiefs who are 70 years old. They've been overseeing life in their village for 50 years. What have I done for 50 years? Nothing. Who has 50 years of expertise in anything? Very, very few people. And that insight and that deep, deep understanding of how things work and where the pressure points are in the community is just simply invaluable. And if you've ever sat down with a 70-year-old man, maybe you have to invest some time before you get around to the meat of the issue, but that insight is so valuable. The most important questions to listen to and to really validate and consider are the ones that you think are just silly. Because something might be so painfully obvious to you because you're a nurse or a doctor, and it's not at all obvious to the people who you need to really understand it. So those questions where you feel like, oh, I can't believe they're asking me this question over and over, those are the places where you really need to take the time to listen and to understand why are these questions being asked, and to validate those questions with an explanation and with a response.
In the worksheet, you'll notice there's some pretty obvious places to write down who you're talking to and how you're going to talk to them. But then there's a chunk for like just writing down the results of these conversations. And of course, people are different and every conversation is different, so do that bit however the hell you want.
So maybe you're thinking like, this sounds like a great idea in theory, but I don't have time. I have to make my numbers. I need to get this program going so that I can get these reports out so I can raise more money. I get it. I've been there. You can do both. And if you don't take the time to do this, if you don't design things in this way, they're just not going to work over the long term. Whether you have to go back to that funder and say, I need a little bit more time to do these really, really important community feedback sessions, or whether you do them as you're rolling out and you just iterate on your program after you've started, whatever you have to do to integrate this, this is part of the design phase. But I think something interesting happens when you take the time to ask someone a question and then listen to their answer and provide them a response. Whether or not they agree with what you're saying in the moment, you've changed the way that they're thinking about the overall program and the service. So just that process, just that process of having the exchange and the dialogue changes the perception, changes the dynamic, and really starts to solicit and to secure that community buy-in.